Hey everyone, DJ Short from NBC Sports Edge here, back for another fantasy baseball Q&A. We've done in the past 2 weeks, and now we're here into the regular season. Just a few days into the season here. I will be here every Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern time, for the foreseeable future. Usually with these Q&As, we'll probably go about 30 to 40 minutes. And we can talk about anything on your mind. I mean, there's a lot going on, even in this short 5 days we've had so far in the season. And usually I'm just like, let's, sit back, not overreact to things. But I feel like so much is going on and so much is really up in the air. I've said this in an article I wrote before the season, that this season is really an experiment in real time with all of these different rule changes, the pitch clock, the shift restrictions, the limits throwing over to bases, the more balanced schedules. There's so many different factors that are making this season extremely interesting, even in this short amount of time. I'm going to give folks a little bit of time to hop in here. Feel free, of course, to submit your questions. Can be fantasy related, can be just baseball talk in general. Happy to get into any of that. So, I guess to start with, as we sort of zoom out here over the past 5 days, like I said, so much going on. But what's really stood out to me has been the explosion of stolen bases. There's been 84 stolen bases through the first 5 days of the season, 84 for 100. So that's easy math, even for me, to tell you that's 84% success rate on stolen bases, which is just crazy. Um, Teams really taking advantage of that. We've seen the Orioles, especially, be very active on the base pass. Jorge Mateo, Cedric Mullins, etc., being very active early on. Pitchers can only throw over twice, when a base runner's on, and then base runners have that freedom to feel like they can go for it. Base is a little bit bigger as well. We'll see if there's an adjustment by teams, but it's smart to take advantage of it this early in the season as pitchers get used to it. And I think having a catcher who can, has that pop time and get the ball out quickly to second base certainly comes in handy. And, when we think about it from a fantasy perspective, I think it raises everyone's profile a little bit. These new rules I think will boost everyone to some extent. But when you think of like a player like a Tommy Edman, who was drafted, in the top 100 players certainly, and deserved after what he did last year. But I think he's still a safe floor. Like, he's going to run, but he's toward the bottom of the Cardinals order. Um, and I think you will likely get a player late rounds. I would say we've said Estuary Ruiz is going to be maybe that guy who could steal like 60 plus bases, but maybe it's a Jorge Mateo. Who knows? Maybe it's an Anthony Volpe who, toward the end of spring training was probably going in the 120s, 130s as far as overall players. But yeah, I think we could get a really surprise contributor, finish the season as a top 100 player just on the back of this stolen base explosion. And again, we will see how teams adjust. I'm sure it will happen. Um, we haven't really seen a lot of pitch outs in recent years. That's sort of like gone the way of the dinosaur. But I think we're probably going to see it more at this point. I think it's just the smart play. So I think that'll be something to watch here in the coming days. I think the success rate can only go down most likely, but we may see other things go up. Like, so far, the batting average on balls in play with hitters is at 298. It was 290 last year. It's kind of trended down in recent years. Interestingly, and again, this is 5 games of data, like, batting average on ground balls is not exceedingly high. So, I think there's some noise with some of those early numbers, but certainly keep an eye on the batting average on balls in play and stuff like that. I do think we're going to see more balls slip through that maybe hasn't in previous years. And also just the pace of the game is so much more compelling to watch, much less, wasted time, so to speak. Games about 30 minutes shorter. So that has been pretty cool to see these games go by quick. I don't mind it necessarily. All right. So let's start out here with Mario. And he says, what are you predicting for Brian Bayo when he returns to the Red Sox rotation? I think he'll be good. He looks really good in the spring. Um, and the stuff's there. You work with Pedro Martinez during the offseason, which, automatically to me is like, oh, well, I mean, learning from a Hall of Famer and a master, one of the best pitchers of my lifetime, certainly is intriguing to me. I don't know how many innings he's going to throw. Dealt with a little forearm issue early in camp, set him back a little bit, but he looked really good in his game action toward the end of the spring. I think he's going to be someone you want to pick up in mixed leagues, but um, you know, progress isn't always a straight line with young starting pitchers. So just something to keep in mind. But he's someone I would maybe stash if you have an open IL spot and see what happens here. Before we move on, just a quick reminder: every season is draft season. Get your Rotoworld Draft Guide bundle today and dominate your football, baseball, and basketball drafts. Packed with profiles, rankings, projections. Order today and get all three Rotoworld Draft Guides for the price of two. Plus, use promo code Barry for to save an extra 20% at checkout. Yes, we're past fantasy baseball draft season, although some might be drafting in season right now. It happens. But before you know it, it'll be NFL training camp. We'll be a couple months into the baseball season, and football will be on our minds. So good to get out ahead on that. Up next here, we have Mitch. How much early season rope do I give CJ Abrams and Trevor Rogers? I think I'd probably give more rope to Rogers and see if he can regain the form that he had last year. Abrams, I think, is intriguing in the sense that I think he's got the speed, he can make contact, but certainly some warts in his game as he develops here. And I think speed being so not easy to find, but you can get it, and you can get out of a middle infield spot. Bryce Turang is emerged over the first few days of the season, and to me, I'd rather have Turang right now. Better lineup situation there in Milwaukee. I think Abrams probably is going to play every day, whereas Turang is more of a probably a platoon player. He's not going to play necessarily against lefties, although his good defense helps his case. I actually wrote about Turang in our pickups of the day column. And in case you don't know, every weekday we're going to do a pickups of the day column at NBCSportsEdge.com. About two or three players a day we'll recommend. Some will be relevant in the headlines, maybe someone coming off a big performance. Maybe it's a minor leaguer off to a hot start, prospect to stash, a streamer, an emerging threat for saves, names like that. But I put Turang in there today with Mike Clevenger as well. Clevenger gets the Pirates in his next start. He's really good against the Astros in his season debut on Sunday. Showed an uptick of velocity. But yeah, as for this question, I would. Rogers was so good a couple of years ago, and I think it's worth hanging on and seeing how this develops with him. Abrams, I'm not as sold as hanging on to him because I think at this point, especially with stolen bases being up, the replacement level is there on the waiver wire. Question from Jimmy here. Now that Nootbaar is on the IL, do you think that's Alec Burleson, has a chance to seize a larger role for himself and stick in the number 2 hole on a great offense? I would love to see it, obviously. It's a shame about Nootbaar because he's one of those guys who I was like, man, he has a chance to be a breakout type of player this season. So hopefully he gets back and, is healthy and ready to rock in short order here. But Burleson, I think, is a pretty underrated prospect. He's done nothing but hit. Left-handed hitter as well. So even if it's like a platoon situation, it could be on the strong side there. Has a good approach, has power. Like I'm saying, I think he's been an underrated prospect and someone who could flat out hit. I don't know how the Cardinals keep finding these guys, but Burleson, I think he's more of like a fourth or fifth outfielder in a deeper mixed league right now, as we kind of wait and see. Because once the Nootbaar's back, then maybe Burleson doesn't have as prominent a role. So that's something to keep in mind. I wouldn't want to drop anybody too important, but certainly in a deeper mixed league where you have 4 or 5 outfielder spots, he's worth a shot. if you are in a keeper or dynasty format, especially, I think Burleson's worth a try. I think he's pretty impressive, young hitter. So let's see up next here. Any insight on when Bryce Harper will be back? I think it's much too soon to say for sure when Bryce Harper will be back. I think it was interesting the Phillies didn't put Harper on the 60-day injured list to begin the season. Basically, if they had put him on the 60-day IL, that would have ruled him out for the first 2 months. No exceptions there. And there's still a chance that he goes on the 60-day IL eventually, based on his progress and or the Phillies roster needs. So maybe that's still a possibility that he's out until the All-Star break. But the Phillies have at least kept the door open and their options open depending on Harper's progress. I wouldn't plan on anything before July 1. I'd rather be pleasantly surprised, but certainly I think he's worth hanging on to in any leagues where he was drafted. I know that can make it tough in some leagues where you only have 2 IL spots or something like that, but I think he's worth it because by the time he comes back, he could be, providing first round value. That's a huge boost. So, up next here from Nick. Hey DJ, are you concerned about Ketel Marte's slow start? Not really. I mean, we're 4 or 5 games in. Most teams haven't played very much. He had a bad year last year, but he's generally had like this up and down sort of career. It might not be long before he is sort of fringy in a standard mixed league. So I don't think the leash is necessarily super long, but I do like the Diamondbacks lineup. I think it has a chance to be pretty deep when everyone's healthy there. And I think Marte, he's shown it in the past. Maybe he's reached his fantasy peak, but I still think there's something in there that's interesting. But maybe we still have like that version of that early round Ketel Marte in our heads, and I don't think that player is coming back necessarily. But all depends on the depth of your league. It's hard to say that without full context, obviously. With how mediocre he was in his final season with Mets pre-injury, how high is the level of concern on Conforto's start? And how much leash does he have over hot week 1 ads like Mateo, Volser, Grossman, etc.? Well, Conforto hit a homer yesterday, which is definitely nice to see. And again, we're only talking about 5 days of action, 4 games in some cases with some teams. So much too soon to really overreact to anything. And Conforto's not far removed from being like a very middle of the lineup kind of staple hitter who could hit 30 home runs and driving close to 100 runs. So I'd wait it out with Conforto even over some of these other guys. And it's hard to make a one-to-one comparison because maybe you do need a speed player like Mateo on your roster. And if that's the case, go for it. It all just depends on the composition of your roster. I think you're going to need speed this year to compete. You just will. The past couple of years, maybe you could punt it to some extent, be competitive and hang in there, be in the middle of the pack in stolen bases. But this year, you're going to need those pieces of your roster. So if you are a little too power heavy, maybe Mateo does make sense, but I think it all depends on the context of your league. But for me, I like Conforto still over those players, at least in a vacuum, so to speak. All right, up next here, how concerned are you with Verlander's injury? Been offered Verlander for Harper. My bats are loaded, my pitching is not. I would take Verlander in that deal. I would, and especially you saying your pitching might be lacking a little bit here. Again, with Harper, we're waiting until maybe July, maybe it's June, but I wouldn't count on him until July. By July, you could be out of it. The thing about Verlander with this teres major strain, he hasn't stopped throwing, so that's not the issue. He's supposed to be reevaluated later this week, get another scan, see the progress of everything. Maybe we only see him, maybe we see him at the end of April or early May or something like that. Maybe that's the best case scenario. Hard for me to really say. We do know that he'll have to sort of build up again with his workload and innings and all that. So it might be a couple more weeks for Verlander for sure. But it does seem, based on everything the Mets have said, I know it's tough to trust the history there with the Mets, that this is a minor injury. Um, and the shoulder's intact, the elbow's good. So we'll see. I think Verlander, when he's healthy this year, we saw him come back last year, he won the American League Cy Young Award. I think you're going to get more bang for your buck out of Verlander as opposed to, or yeah, Verlander as opposed to Harper this year. So I'd take a shot on Verlander and see where that goes. Um, David here, is Will Smith worth a flyer for closer? Um, I don't see why not. He's not that far removed from being an impact type of reliever. Has kind of trended down in recent years, but has experience in the closer role. Certainly possible he could emerge there. The clerk's in the house there. There's other, waiver wire type closer options available. Pierce Johnson in Colorado, AJ Puck in Miami, Reynaldo Lopez with the White Sox. It's a tough one. I might put Smith, fourth in that group, but it's kind of one of those things. Sometimes if a pitcher gets off to a hot start, converts 3, 4, 5 saves early part of the season, they have a chance to run with it. So it's hard to make any predictions at this point in time, but he probably would be below those in terms of my priorities. Up next here, with Wendell hurt, can John Birdie repeat his magical 2022? So Joey Wendell is dealing with an oblique issue right now, and we know how tough those are. Maybe I missed it, but I haven't seen whether he's going to the injured list or not. But given the history with oblique injuries, wouldn't be surprising if he does and needs to miss some time. So if that's the case, John Birdie, of course, is relevant, and especially in this environment that we are in Major League Baseball right now. Yeah, you're going to want him in your lineup, because if he gets on base, he's going to run. There's not a lot else there, which I think is something to consider. We could see players who give you a little bit more power, batting average, real run production type stuff. And if they're just tacking on 5 stolen bases here, 5 stolen bases there, that could provide more value than a Birdie could. But yeah, I think if Wendell's hurt and Birdie's playing every day, then yeah, Birdie needs to be started and rostered in most leagues. A 10-team league, maybe not. Maybe that's more of a day-to-day thing, but yeah, he'll be relevant again if that's the case. Question here from Mitch. Any idea when Brandon Pfaadt could get called up, and can he contribute right away? I was very disappointed to see him not make the rotation there for the Diamondbacks out of spring training. Led the minors in strikeouts last year. Great stuff. Had a great spring. At the beginning of camp, I was not thinking that he was a legitimate candidate, but he was so good this spring that I was a little bit surprised by the end of camp that he didn't make the team. I think it's one of those things where, the Diamondbacks will reassess where they are end of April. And if Pfaadt's off to a great start in AAA, I think we could see him up. I think it could happen very, very soon. Mixed league relevant, yes. Upon the call up, certainly. But yeah, I think we just need to understand that sometimes with young pitchers, the progress is all over the map. So expecting him to come up right away and be dominant, that's a tough task. But I do believe in this stuff, and I think he has a chance to be very, very good for a Diamondbacks team, which is on the rise for sure. Question from John, and just 2 names we just mentioned here: Pierce Johnson or AJ Puck. I'd go with Puck here. Daniel Bard, of course, is on the injured list right now with the Rockies due to anxiety. Of course, he's had a very eventful career, lots of ups and downs for him. So we wish him well. Hopefully, he comes back soon. But mental health, that's the most important thing. But Pierce Johnson presumably has a chance there. I think by virtue of just being the closer in Colorado, that comes with some danger. I think AJ Puck was very good with the Marlins. Was very good with the A's last year. Was traded to the Marlins. in the JJ Bleday trade, which was a surprise for me. I didn't really get that from the A's at the time. Puck clearly established himself as a quality reliever last season. And I think he's the best pitcher in that Marlins bullpen to me. I could see him being one of those guys that, yeah, he reels off a few saves and it's just like his gig. I could really see that happening. He already converted one against the Mets. I think it was last Friday, and looked good doing it. Stuff's good. Of course, he was a former top prospect starting pitcher, but these things happen where you sort of fail in the rotation, injuries, what have you, and you find yourself in the bullpen. I like his stuff, so Puck would be my choice. We'll see if he keeps getting those chances. Okay, up next. Are there any concerns to consider with the Blue Jays starting pitchers? Are they just off to a slow start? Jose Barrios, I don't get it. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like he should be better than this, but you know, we have a year of data last year. The first start was rough. So he's not someone I'd be starting in a mixed league right now. He's not too far removed from being very good. So we'll see what kind of tweaks he can make. I think it's still in him somewhere. Chris Bassett, I'm a little concerned about as well. First off, going to the AL East in a ballpark where they moved the fences in, he doesn't have dominant stuff. The velocity's down, was down in the spring, down his first start. So I generally faded Bassett in fantasy leagues this spring, and that was even putting the velocity stuff aside. Just because he doesn't have that dominant stuff, he gets by more of the full arsenal of pitches. That's his game. Such a varied arsenal that he has. But yeah, if the velocity isn't there, there's not like the separation between pitches. Yeah, I have some concerns about Bassett right now. We'll see. Maybe a few weeks from now, the velocity will not be a major concern, but we will see. Question from Brian here. I have Jose Leclerc and Scott McGuff. Who is the better handcuff, Will Smith or Andrew Chafin? I already have Doval and Taylor Rogers. I'd go with Andrew Chafin here. I think the Diamondbacks made a bit of a gamble in terms of signing McGuff, who, pitched in the majors like 8 years ago and basically remade himself pitching overseas. I think a worthy gamble to see if maybe he turned into something that could be quite valuable. I think the Diamondbacks only signed him for like 4.5 million, 6.5 million, something like that over 2 years. So a worthy gamble by them, but we'll see. I think Chafin notched the first save. He is left-handed, which isn't necessarily ideal for a closer, but lots of experience, success. Again, this is one of those things where, like, if he knocks out a couple of saves, McGuff blew a save last night, Chafin could be the guy. I wouldn't be surprised. Up next here, are there any updates on Liam Hendricks? I know with a lot. The end of draft season. Okay. Yeah, during the spring, I didn't naturally. It just didn't make sense to speculate on anything in regard to his timetable. And the White Sox were the same way. They were pretty mum on all that stuff. But there was an announcement by Hendricks yesterday that he's doing his last round of chemo for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and hopes to be back at some point in the near future. So hard to put an exact timetable on that, but I don't know. A couple months from now, month, we'll see. But he looks in good shape. Doing his last round of chemo. I think we'll see him certainly by mid-season. You know what I mean? There was so much talk about Kendall Graveman being the guy and Reynaldo Lopez, but I think Hendricks is going to come back, and man, I hope he comes back and is better than he's ever been. So best of luck to him as far as that's concerned. We'll be here for another 15 minutes or so. So depending on how many questions we have here. So if you have anything else on your mind, feel free to submit questions here. Can be fantasy, can be regular baseball chat, takeaways from the first few days of the season. I could say this out front here. I might be really wrong on the Rays. I took the under on their win total. We did a We did an over under wins episode right before the start of the season on the Circling the Bases podcast, which you should subscribe to. If you haven't already, subscribe today. We're going to do a waiver Wednesday show tomorrow. Myself and Scott Pianowski from Yahoo. Good time, always a good time with Scott. So definitely check it out. Subscribe if you haven't already. But yeah, I took the under on the Rays win total. I can't remember what it was. I think it was 89 wins, something like that. I was skeptical, but man, if Glasnow can come back and be what he looks like he is, if he could just stay healthy, that top four in that rotation could be really, really good. And Wander Franco's looked awesome to start the year as well. So I might take the L on that. But we'll see. It's early. It's very early. What are your thoughts on Yuri Perez or DL Hall coming up soon with the team's injuries? Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, Cueto got hurt last night, so we'll see what happens with that. DL Hall, I don't know. I mean, he's still getting stretched out. I think he had a lower back issue during camp. Certainly has the ability. A little concerned about the control, so I think it might be a little while before we see Perez. And Hall is not someone I'd necessarily have as like a priority stash right now in a mixed league. Certainly interesting, but not a priority stash with me. Thoughts on Grayson Rodriguez? He didn't pitch that well in his first start in AAA, but the Orioles' arms don't look that great either. I'd be more likely to stash Rodriguez than Hall. Clearly, Rodriguez, I guess, has some work to do. There was some harsh words from the Orioles GM at the end of camp where he was basically like the best version of Grayson Rodriguez did not show up. Of course, on Twitter, that was not well received from folks who kind of looked at it as like the Orioles are playing the service time game and that sort of stuff. But maybe that was a dose of tough love to motivate him. I don't really know. But also, consideration is that he didn't pitch a lot last year in AAA. Had a lat issue, so he just didn't pitch a ton of innings. So maybe slow playing it with him is not the worst idea in the world, especially if the Orioles expect to be in the mix, in contention down the stretch this year. They want to have him active in September. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see how the Orioles navigate that. But I do like Rodriguez as a better stash than Hall, which shouldn't really be shocking news. All right. Up next here, I know it's early, but any concerns with Sean Murphy? No. We are 5 games in. So I don't really think the evaluation should change that much from where you were in preseason. This is a unique year, like I said, in that yeah, you're thinking about stolen bases being up. Maybe that changed some of your evaluation with middle infielders, outfielders, but with catchers, not really. Um, you know, it's a tough one as far as like pitchers go. Maybe you're a little more concerned about pitchers who are not big strikeout guys and who pitch to contact. Can the shifts impact, ERA going one way or the other? If they have a bad defense behind them, is that more relevant than ever? I think that's certainly the case. But yeah, with a catcher like Murphy, like let's just see it settle in. I love the power. I think the lineup is obviously very good. Travis d'Arnaud's in the mix, but they have the flexibility with the DH spot too. I saw Murphy as the top 12 fantasy catcher going into the spring, and I thought the Braves were smart with this one, trading for Murphy during the offseason because his pop time is elite, good arm. I mean, that's going to matter in a year like 2023, where stolen bases are going to be more prevalent than ever before. So I thought that was a smart trade by the Braves as they started to project and look ahead to what this season was going to look like. Okay. Question from Raphael: is Bryce Turang the real deal, or is he just on a hot streak? He might just be on a hot streak. You know what I mean? He's a young hitter. Teams will have a chance to adjust to him. He's hit safely in 3 out of 4 games since coming up. One of the first hit, I believe, was like an infield single where he showed off his speed, which is important. Has back-to-back multi-hit games. Hit a grand slam for his first career home run against the Mets on Monday afternoon in Milwaukee. And the emotion that he showed running the bases was pretty cool. But yeah, Luis Urias going down with that hamstring strain. I think he could miss like 6 to 8 weeks. I think that's a big deal, because the Brewers had the option of, like, let's say Turang struggled out of the gate, they could move Urias to second base. They could put Brian Anderson at third. They could have Joey Weimer in right. Tyrone Taylor will eventually be back. Sal Frelick. So Brewers had a ton of options for the outfield if they needed to move Anderson to third. But now that Urias is hurt, like, this is Turang's gig. I think Owen Miller could play against some tough lefties, but Turang has the opportunity. He has elite sprint speed, or near elite, 96th percentile in sprint speed. I put that in the pickups of the day column today. That's a big deal. This is someone who hit in AAA last year. I don't think the power is, you know, something that's going to overwhelm you. Maybe he could be a double-digit power guy, but the speed is there. The defense is very good, which is not something to overlook here. Like, that could cement his place in this Brewers lineup, especially while Arias is out. So, do I think you're going to start him in a standard 10 or 12 team mixed league? Probably not. But if you need a middle infielder, utility spot, if you need some speed, I think you should ride with Turang and see where this goes. I think he's a better prospect than maybe some folks gave him credit for going into the spring. Okay, a few minutes left here. Who would you prefer to drop to add a hitter? Graterol, Wesneski, Lugo, Mary Kelly. Uh, very funny. Who would I prefer to drop to add a hitter? My gut is saying Graterol. I don't. We'll see what happens with that Dodgers bullpen. I think it could take a while for us to really know, and maybe there's not going to be like a regular guy. Maybe the Dodgers will truly go with a committee approach there. Um, Wesneski was like one of my favorites in the spring, and I think you're going to get some good value out of Lugo early this season. Whether he can, have a massive workload as a starting pitcher, we'll see. He's always wanted to pitch as a starter. I know that well from his time with the Mets. He has the arsenal to do it. He pitched really well in his season debut. I don't think Mel Kelly's like a lights out type of fantasy starter, but being the fifth or sixth arm on a mixed league staff, I think he's perfectly respectable. So I would drop Graterol and see where that goes. Again, I don't know what hitters you're talking about, but that's just sort of my gut feeling. Up next here, thoughts on the Red Sox offense. Duvall and Verdugo off to hot starts. At what point do I consider selling high on these guys? Oh, and their pitching staff is a dumpster fire. Yeah, I don't mean to laugh at the Red Sox pitching staff, but I mean, it might be. We'll see what Bayo gives him when he comes back from the injured list. But Chris Sale didn't look good in his season debut. Hard to know what to expect there. Duvall, I mean, he's only a couple of years removed from 30 plus homers, leading the NL in RBIs. So is it that crazy to think that he could be a gem? Not really, and he's actually pretty decent defender as well. Verdugo, he's a tough one in fantasy for me because, yeah, I think the batting average will be there, but like, doesn't run a lot, not a ton of power. So just not someone I generally chased after in mixed leagues. But if he's hitting near the top of the lineup and like gets on base, like, he's going to be a useful compiler. And sometimes boring is good. So I believe in both of them. But yeah, I mean, like, if Duvall hits like 7 home runs in April or whatever, yeah, I mean, like, see what you can get out there for him, especially if you feel good about where you are from a power perspective. So I'll be here for another 5 minutes, just about. So if anything on your mind, feel free to drop it in here in the chat before I go here. And a reminder here, download the Roto World app to receive breaking player news all season long. Stay ahead of the competition by favoriting players on your roster. Get the latest injury updates, player news, and much more delivered right to your phone. It's available in your app store today. And make sure you have your players on your fantasy roster favorited so you can get those alerts You can be on top of the waiver wire, all that good stuff. So get the Roto-World app today. Up next here, can Trace Thompson hit 25 to 30 homers this year? No, I don't think so. Um, he's been very good since returning to the Dodgers, and I don't think anybody saw that coming. He's basically been in the wilderness for the past couple of years, but has been very good since returning to the Dodgers. We're only talking about 250 plate appearances, but OPS north of like 950. Had the 3-homer game on Saturday against a lefty. He got the start against a lefty. Sunday he made a start against a righty, which is good to see. But I don't know how much he's going to play. I put 75 down on Trace Thompson in my Tout Wars mixed draft league out of $1,000 budget. I might have overspent there. I just don't think he's going to play enough to make it worth that. But I needed some power on my roster, so it's kind of one of those things where just waiting and seeing what might happen. But I'm skeptical he'll get enough at bats to get to that total. But I think he'll be productive when he plays. Um, let's see. Any chance we'll see Jason Dominguez this year? I wouldn't count on it, but he looked so good in spring training. I can't speak to like the quality of pitchers he hit the home runs off, but man, he hit some prodigious home runs, and I mean, I was impressed. Um, it does seem like his stock has declined a little bit over the past couple of years, but power's legit. And maybe injuries are what makes it happen for him to get a chance in the majors this year. But yeah, he's got to keep it going against higher competition. Plate discipline, all that type of stuff. I think he's someone to track very, very closely on the chance that he gets a real opportunity here with the Yankees. So yeah, I wouldn't rule it out as a possibility, but not something I'm necessarily counting on for this season. This might be our last question here, unless there's anything else from you guys. A couple of questions about Jake McCarthy to start the season. He's off to a really miserable start so far. He's 1 for 13 with 3 strikeouts. It's only 4 games. It would be my be my advice right now. He was so good last year. He has the speed as well. His batting on jump balls in play right now is 100. I'm afraid we might be overreacting here. It's not like he's striking out a ton or anything like that. If he struggles for a long time, yeah, maybe he starts to lose some at bats. But was really good last year. I like the speed, the environment that we're in Major League Baseball. I think he's going to want to be somebody you hang on to. So yeah, maybe not the best start for McCarthy, but I would hang on for a little more than 4 games. Like, let's give him a couple weeks at least before we start panicking. So that'll do it for me today. Thank you so much for the questions. It's been cool hanging out with you guys as we dissect the first few days of the season. Like I said, I don't want to overreact, but this year is slightly different with the stolen bases, with these rule changes. I think you can sink your teeth into some of these numbers and start to make some judgments. I think you can look at lineups, you can look at situations, and start to make some reasonable guesses about playing time and players you should pounce on the waiver wire. Again, I don't want to overreact and like drop a player who's super important, but usually when you leave a draft, there's a couple of players on your roster who I would say are flexible, and you can, shuffle some names off the waiver wire and take some shots, and maybe you do get a waiver wire gem early in the season. So don't be rigid in your thinking in these first couple of weeks. Play with that back end of your roster, try to figure some stuff out. But thanks so much for hanging out. You can follow me on Twitter at DJ Short. And I will see you back here next Tuesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, for our weekly fantasy baseball Q&A. Take care.